Ping aren't typically known for their better player or tour irons, but could these be about to change that? Let's go find out. Ping are really well known for their game improvement products, and when it comes to irons such as the G430 have been super popular, but you wouldn't necessarily think of them as maybe a tour brand. That's where things are about to change, and Ping have been working with their tour players to improve their offering at the bottom of their iron lineup. Introducing the Ping Blueprint S. We had a massive hit with the first Blueprint iron in terms of that small player's blade, but it only really worked for a very small subsection of golfers who basically hit the golf ball nearly perfectly. We all wish that was us, but it's not. So really, Ping wanted to develop something that sits kind of above that. It's very workable, it's a controlled product, it could be used on tour, but it also go into the bags of good club golfers. As you can see, this has a pretty compact shape, it's a lot smaller heel to toe than we see in other Ping clubs, and the top line and the sole are a lot more compact. If we look from the pitching wedge up to the 6 iron, each iron is kind of a different shape based on what it needs to do in the bag. And actually, from 5 iron up, this is where we start to see the tech. In the back of the club head, we have this technology called precision pocket forging, and that is this cavity in here which has added weight in, which is going to help with that launch and distance in your long irons. There is also a elastometer insert in here which is going to help kind of continue that feel, so you can't really feel a difference between these irons and the other ones. You can see we've got that tungsten toe weight in here as well, which is going to help with like the fine tuning of that swing weight through the set. Now what's quite interesting is these have the same lofts as the Blueprint T blades and also the same lofts as the I230 irons, which means we should see some really interesting combo sets being possible. Before we get to that, how do these actually perform? Let's hit some shots. So I've got a half set of odd irons here to test, starting with the 9. It sits really nicely behind the ball. Love the fact there's literally no offset at this point. It does still have that typical Ping shaping of like the bit higher toe, which I think is quite nice. I like the fact it's small, but in no way does it look intimidating, which I think Ping do really well. Got that a bit thin, but it still managed to reach the green, which is quite helpful. Had a decent high on as well too. I just think the control of these is remarkable. Like those two balls are so close together and the ball flights were really good. I like how high the ball flies. Sometimes I think when you move down to a smaller set you can lose some of that ball flight sometimes. It's definitely not happening here. On average in the sim these are flying up at 98 feet. So I'm definitely going to get a bit of control with that. And paired with the fact the spin was averaging like 7,500. I'm definitely going to have some stopping power. I do think personally for me that smaller size gives me a little bit more confidence to hit out of it and actually helps create more consistency as well, which is not what you'd always think, but it is pretty interesting. I also know like I tested a lot of clubs and these are kind of ones which when I took in the same test had got my data. Once I'd like finished them and got enough data for my testing, I kind of just wanted to keep hitting them, which doesn't happen all the time and kind of points to it could be a good match for me. Right, 7 iron. Still a really nice compact size behind the ball, and actually the toe drops down a little bit on this one. Oh, that nearly went in the hole. I hope we got a down the line zoom on that in the bag. One thing I really like about these is the fact they have a real player's feel to them. They're kind of soft but also feel fast. I don't really know how that's possible, but it's definitely a bit different to what you'd see from some of Ping's like longer irons. If you're enjoying the content, please like and subscribe. It makes a massive difference to the content and hopefully helps you see more of it too. Right, back to the video. I've been quite surprised as well at how forgiving these are on kind of not perfect strikes. The consistency of my distance has been really up there, which is obviously something that's important when you're firing into green. Now, a big thing that's going to help that control is also the height that these get up to. They were over 98 feet on average, which is really good for that stopping power. And also that's paired with quite a lot of spin. They're spinning over 6,000. So the combination of those two is really going to help you out in terms of stopping it near the pin if you hit it straight. Now, in terms of carry distance, when I collected the data with these were carrying 151 yards on average, which is pretty much where I'd expect my clubs to sit. I like to average about in that 150 to 154 mark. So, all good in terms of distance. So far, these are feeling really good in terms of like height, control, workability, having a pretty consistent launch window. Will that continue into the longer irons? Let's go hit some 5s. 5 iron. We're down to that sticky bit in the bag where no one really likes it, do you? Like, you've just been much more comfortable hitting a 6 iron, which is probably why this is the point where all the tech starts to come in these clubs. Now, what I want to see here is if I still have that same like control given the tech, but also good gap in through the bag. Because sometimes when I get to like 5-4 iron, they don't quite go as far as I want them to. Slightly thin, but I actually still like the fact that I still got a decent height on it, and that's something I did notice when I hit these indoor in the simulator. On the slightly lower strikes, I was still getting a decent height and actually pretty similar distance to what I got on the middle ones, which is obviously pretty helpful. Actually, the ball flight on a good strike's really good. With the others, I was up at like the 98 feet with the 7 and a 9. This is looking at like more 88 on average, which is a little bit lower, but actually there's a decent amount of spin to balance that out. So we're looking at like 4,600 RPM on average, which is still going to give you that good control. Now, if you go to a fitting, I would have a look at those height numbers. Generally, at some point, you're going to see like the height starting to drop off in your longer irons. Maybe just because you don't have enough speed relative to attack angle to hit it as high with this club. So I would just notice at what point it starts to drop too much, and maybe that's why you should move into like a hybrid or a high lofted wood instead of like a 3 iron. I would also say this is probably one of the more attractive 5 irons in this like category over the ball. It sits really nicely. I really like the length of the club, and actually there's really minimal offset, which is something I really like to see. I also just really like the consistency of like the height and the flight. When I strike it good, it kind of feels like it goes through the same window each time, which is obviously important in terms of like predictability and being able to control the ball into the green. Now, in terms of carry distance, this ended up averaging 173.4, which actually I'm really pleased with, and I didn't necessarily expect to get that much distance out of it. It's a bigger gap from like the 7 to the 5 than from the 9 to the 7, which is definitely not what I would have expected. And actually for like a player's iron or a CB, the max I would ever expect is like 175 from this club. So it's like bang on the money in terms of distance. Overall, I'd say I've been pretty impressed with these irons. I thought they'd be good in terms of control and workability, but I was a little worried when they arrived that they were quite small and I wouldn't quite get that distance I'd want. But actually, I've been disproven by Ping there. I think they've done a really great job of filling that kind of gap they had in their lineup. And actually, I'm really excited to go down to the fitting centre, get fit into these, see what shaft they recommend, and actually see if there's a potential for going in my bag this year. Given all the tour players that have won with this or put it in play on tour, I think it's going to be super successful, and you might also really like these.